So we've built a milk processing hub, a milk factory in a box. So essentially, we're turning the farmer into a processor and the distributor, so they get the margin that would normally go to those parts of the value chain. Push the button, the milk is pasteurised and cooled down. That's all they need to do.
Happy Cow Milk, Glen Herud, you're an ex-farmer or a continuing farmer, but what's the thing you want to bring to milk that consumers currently don't have access to, or farmers aren't able to do? Because those are the two parts of the equation, aren't they?
Yeah, I suppose originally the original thought was your farming's becoming so big that in order to get started in farming, you still need to have a significant amount of capital. So the real thinking was, well, how can I go farming without needing, really $1 million in equity? And the simple calculation was, well, if you can milk a cow and sell her milk for $3 a litre instead of getting 50 cents from Fonterra, surely you can make a business out of that. and you can make a business out of that, but it's not easy. So that's really the start of the journey. So it was really around a small farmer selling direct to the consumer. So in order to do that, you have food safety regulation, you've got milk processing, you've got distribution, you've got sales and marketing, which is the whole value chain. And, we were successful in, I suppose, a number of areas. Well, I suppose if you think of it as a three-legged stool, we could only ever really get two legs working at once. And that's really what the next stage of Happy Cow Milk is about, is how do we actually streamline the system? How do we make it so farmers around the world can actually sell direct to their local customers?
That's interesting. So that's obviously there's a broader trend that this plugs into, right, around the direct to consumer. That's happened, that's been happening for 20 years, but certainly through 2020 with the pandemic, it's accelerated. Manufacturers have wanted to sell direct to where they couldn't sell through retailers, or distribution was disrupted. What's you mentioned, the two out of the three stools. What are those three different pillars, and what's the hard one that's the hardest one to stand up?
Well, I suppose selling milk direct to the customer, you can sell t-shirts or hardware or anything like that relatively simply, but selling milk is a perishable product, and it's also a highly regulated product. So that's essentially what Happy Cow is solving. So when I say we got the three-legged stool, is basically you've got your sales and marketing, and I put distribution in that. You've got your milk processing, and then your actual farming. So the farming was actually the easy part, because you put cows in a paddock and they eat grass and produce milk, and the 80-20 principle dictates that if you do it, you do the basics well, you can farm relatively well. But then the processing was too inefficient. Lots of bottling, and you just processing at small scale was inefficient unless you spend significant amounts of money, which I didn't have the opportunity to do. And then the next one was really distribution. The sales and marketing was pretty easy, but distribution, I think most entrepreneurs or business people will tell you, is a real killer that will kill your business. It certainly killed mine.
So how are you approaching it now with the distribution side of it?
So I suppose we were when I shut the business down, we had so much support from the public who wanted to, I suppose, wanted to see us keep going, and had a bit of time to really do a lot of reading and just think about things and really analyze the finances, and to figure out where the costly part of the business was, and where all the losses would be made. And as I alluded to before, it's that milk processing, it's really around the amount of labor. So anything that required labor, we needed to strip out, and that was around bottling and actual pasteurizing milk. And then it's the stuff you don't think about. It's unloading and loading, it's connecting pumps to vats, and then it's washing everything at the end. So we've built this, what we call a milk processing hub, a milk factory in a box. And the principle is that we have these bulk containers, like a 100-litre tank, and that tank is a pasteurizer and a storage tank. and you place these inside the hub, and the farmer fills them up with milk. They push the button, the milk is pasteurized and cooled down, and then that's all they need to do. They don't have to bottle it or handle that processed milk. And then they take that entire container, that 100-litre container, and deliver it to the retailers or the cafes where it's dispensed via our dispenser. So the efficiency there is we've just eliminated the amount of work you do on a farm, so the amount of handling, the amount of labour needed, and also we've streamlined distribution by delivering a bulk tank. So you could, instead of delivering to a cafe 3 times a week like I was doing, you could do it once a week.
So this milk factory in a box, you've effectively turned what was a series of processes, tasks and activities that take the milk that's been milked from the cow, and put it into the bottles that are ready for retail sale. And you're doing this all at the farmer's gate. So the farmer then gets all of the, I would assume, the increase or that delta of margin between them getting the milk produced and being able to sell it at retail rates, rather than selling it at scale for someone else to do that part of adding the margin.
Yeah, so essentially we're turning the farmer into a processor and the distributor, so they get the margin that would normally go to those parts of the value chain. And it's when you actually sit back and you analyze, where were the hours spent every single day, and where's the risk and the labor. And we identified that it's really handling pasteurized milk. So when you're dealing with raw milk, the standards are much lower, because the regulators assume that raw milk is contaminated, and once it gets pasteurized, it's considered to be pure. So once you pump, like let's say pasteurized milk, you pump it out of a pasteurizer and into, say, a bottling machine, all that part of the processing has to be super clean and super hygienic, because the risk of contaminating that pasteurized milk is too great. So when you see operators with white overalls and white boots and their hairnets on and in a filtered air room and things like that, that's because they're handling pasteurized milk. So to solve that problem, you need a lot of equipment, a milk factory, all those sorts of things. We basically said, well, let's just put raw milk in a tank. You seal the tank, it's airtight, nothing can happen to it. You push the button, it pasteurizes and cools down, and then it never sees the light of day until it attaches to a dispenser.
Wow.
So that's essentially removing the risk of contamination. And I suppose you take a bit of insight into the IKEA story, where distributing a chair or a table was expensive. So you flat pack it and make the customer do it. So for us, washing reusable bottles and filling them is expensive. So we ask the customers to do that.
How exciting. There's 2 trends there, isn't there? One is decentralization of production. It's now can be produced at not 1 or 5 or 10 places, but thousands or 10,000s, because of this other trend that you've picked up on or managed to do around it's a micro version of a large pasteurizing factory, right? Like if I go through a cheese plant, as you say, the restrictions, I'm wearing a hairnet, I'm wearing a white coat, I've got white overalls on. It's huge, because you're going through there into an environment that's producing food with pasteurized milk. So,
that's right. Well, actually, it's interesting as well. When you look at a modern pasteurizer, they would use, I suppose, high temperature, short time processing. So it's they use heat exchangers, plate heat exchangers, and you heat the milk for 72 degrees for 15 seconds. So that's how most modern milk is produced, and it's from a thermodynamic perspective, it's very efficient. The amount of heat in and heat out is the most efficient way of doing it. But those are complicated machines, and if something goes wrong, it's a disaster. So there's lots of checks and balances and things that have to happen. So what we've done is we've actually gone back to 1950s type technology, batch pasteurizing, and so old technology that people think is inefficient. And by putting a little computer on the lid, we now put it into the hands of lay people, and it now becomes actually more efficient when you put it into the context of a farmer who's getting 60 cents a litre, give them a relatively inefficient pasteurizer, but it simplifies all the other aspects of milk pasteurizing. So I find that quite interesting.
So it's really you're kind of heralding a shift away from the centralized model. And for the first 10 minutes of our chat now, we've been talking a lot about a manufacturing product, which is probably a different avenue of where I was expecting to go on this. Of the Happy Cow Milk Company, I thought we were going to be talking about milk. Has most of your time since we last caught up in person over the last couple of years, has it been focused on how to create this product rather than how do we distribute the milk? Or are they the same question?
Yeah, well, all our fans, they want to hear about happy cows and happy calves, and they also want to hear about reusable packaging. And basically, in order to, let's look at this two ways. In order to get happy cows and happy calves, we have to really step outside the traditional dairy model, because up until even today, it's really, really hard to find any dairy farmers around the world who will leave their calves with their mothers. So we have to find those select farmers that will do that and give them the opportunity to sell direct. So it gives them, I suppose, a competitive advantage, or gives them an avenue to be individual. So if you're a farmer supplying Fonterra or any of the milk companies and you keep your calves with their mothers, there's no way of you being singled out and customers can choose you. So that's why that's one of the reasons why we're doing the on-farm processing. The other one is the reusable packaging, which is a huge driver of our brand and what our customers are passionate about. And reusable packaging doesn't work under a long supply chain. So the centralized system is too inefficient, because you're not going to fill a truck up with empty bottles and drive it 1,000 kilometers to the milk factory. So localized production, or this decentralized production, actually enables reusable packaging to become a viable option. So that's why we've gone down that track. And decentralization is a trend, and it's enabling us to do things that we used to do back in the 50s and 60s, I suppose.
It's like Back to the Future that's technology enabled to make it happen. And where those shifts happen, like my background's in telecommunications, and there's times for centralization, there's times for distribution. It's like a pendulum, and there's certain things that need to happen, and it's almost impossible to switch, and then it's almost impossible not to. Where are we in that journey, do you think, with Happy Cow Milk?
I think we're at the stage where people don't actually understand what we're building, and they can't actually see what we mean, particularly from the farmer's perspective. And I think, give us 6 months in the market and people will understand. And then I think the penny will drop with a lot of people of like, oh, I see what they're doing. And I mean, our vision is to be a global company. So we're building a system. Well, I want it to be like a platform that could be like a SaaS company where you can onboard customers, relatively easy. But how do you take a milk company with hardware and make that, a SaaS company? So really we've built this so that we kind of build this flywheel where we get a farmer, and if we can attract farmers, we then supply them with the equipment. It turns up on a truck, they basically plug it into the internet, and all of a sudden they're now compliant with food safety regulations.
Whoa.
And then what we do is then we say, well, we've got this farmer on the outskirts of Geelong, and then we say, let's go and find 5 cafes or 5 schools or retailers. So how do we do that here from Christchurch? Or how do we help that Geelong farmer actually recruit them? And then once they're all signed up, we then go and get the customers. So they have to download the Happy Cow app, and we can do that digitally, we can do it in person. There's a whole range of ways we do it. So what we're building is this turnkey solution. So we say, right, we've got farmer, now get his or her customers before they've even outlaid any capital. They'll say, oh, we're interested in this Happy Cow thing. So then our team just goes in and finds all their customers. They've all got the app downloads, and then we say, right, well, there's no risk for you. Here, you've got everyone signed up. They pay for the hardware, and away they go. and we can and we call that our core transaction. Basically, one farmer, 50 cows, 1,500 households, and they'll sell about 1,000 litres of milk a day. So let's say we do that once in Geelong, and then you do it once in Melbourne, and then maybe you do it on the other side of Geelong. And it's really about making the farmer the hero of the story, making them building these little communities of customers and farmers and resellers all working together to basically make the world a better place with better dairy and getting rid of that plastic.
I love that model because it takes advantage of the key problem with any marketplace is supply and demand balancing at equilibrium, so both parties get what they want. Particularly the demand part needs the right price and needs a reason to switch, and the supply part needs a reason to invest or change, which is, and you're actually, at least at the early stage, helping the farmer by reducing the capital and then creating the demand for that farmer so that they've got people to sell to with the level of 50 cows and 1,500 households. That's really interesting.
Well, if you think about it, you think like, let's say you're Fonterra and you decide, oh, we want to get into the Berlin market. And just think about what you'd have to do that. You'd have to have contract supply or processes. You'd have all the agreements with retailers. You'd have to go in at scale and put some serious investment in there. And then you'd need to develop the brand. So it's really almost impossible for a New Zealand company to do this. But if you just go at the very, very small scale and we say, we just need one farmer, and can we find 1,500 customers in Berlin? You bet we could, especially when you've got the brand principles that we stand for, are quite different and quite unique. This reusable packaging and the farming system and the animal welfare. We could just have that one customer, and if we never get any more farmers in Berlin, well, it doesn't matter. She can just run along by themselves. There's no risk to us having to get 5% of that market. We can just get a little fraction, and we can go all around the world to these major cities and just getting one farmer everywhere just to sign up. And anyway, that's the plan, but nothing ever goes to plan.
The economics and the numbers of it sound right, because I think the early vision was how to transform the whole market, which is very difficult, because as just approximately, I'm thinking instead of 50 cows and 1,500 households, maybe you need 5 million cows and 15 million households, and then you're just becoming a competitor to the incumbent. Whereas the way the single origin coffee guys and girls started was they just went for the hipsters and someone that wanted something new and different. There was no competition in terms of Starbucks didn't see it as competition. In fact, if you fast forward 10, 15 years, it's upped everyone's coffee game so that granules isn't the average. Granules is now below average. So once you're successful, and I'm sure with the SaaS model, it'll be easier to attain that. You'll actually shift the quality standards, maybe of the milk, or it could be of the production, or it could be somewhere else in the ecosystem.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I read a book called Simplify in the Last Days of Happy Cow, and really talked about when you look at companies that actually innovate, a lot of them actually drop the price considerably. And I suppose you look at McDonald's or Ford. Ford's a good example. The production line dropped the cost, yet employees also had a massive wage increase. And, that got me thinking. I'd always thought, we need to be a premium product. And then the idea was, well, actually, maybe that's the wrong answer, because you're selling little amounts of milk at lots of different outlets. And the idea was, well, how do we make this so that we can be a budget milk or a cheap milk? And that's when you start thinking about efficiency and start thinking about how you produce things differently. And just on what you were saying about raising the level, what I'm getting at is that we're going to hit the market at the average price of milk, get the brand attributes, the animal welfare, the environmental attributes, and it's in reusable packaging will be far greater than any of the competitors. So I think that's an interesting strategy.
It is, because the premium price works when you're early on in the momentum of the swing, because you want those that are at the edge, which is sustainability and want to do the right thing. But that was probably 20 years ago. We're in the midst of sustainability is way beyond mainstream now. It's urgent. It's for laggards too, because of the climate problem, and it's well recognized everywhere. So it's the right thing to go in with a lower cost and work out, well, where does that cost get saved? And you're doing that through less handshakes to get product to customer.
Yeah, and also, I mean, being sustainable shouldn't be a premium only available to, wealthy people, doing the right thing should be a mainstream thing. So that's really the thinking around it. So, I mean, we're yet to hit the market full steam, so we have to test all this out, but that's the plan. We'll get there eventually. It's not going to happen straight away, but we'll get there.
So you've been crowdfunded for this milk factory in a box. Then the next stage is, okay, there's money there, there's capability, you've got a group of fans that have voted with their money, they want to see Glen do this. What was the next step, and how far along the journey are you with actually manufacturing that milk factory in a box?
Well, it's funny, so the business shut down, and I was literally brushing up my CV to get a job, and no one would employ me because everyone online was saying we need to get this company going again. So we used Patreon, and people supported us for a year and a half, just straight from donations. And that enabled me to come up with this plan. And then last November, we went to our crowd, and basically all we had was a plan. We had nothing else to show for it. And we sold 20% of the company for $400,000. And for the last 12 months, we've used that money to basically build a system. So we've built all the cloud architecture, the apps for the farmer app, the reseller app, the customer app, and the pasteurizer. We built the hub, and basically got the dispenser working. And we're just about to, next week we're going to sort of introduce it to all our shareholders, and depending on when MPI sign us, give us our certification, we'll do a little trial in Christchurch. So that's kind of where we're at. And then we're about to do another crowd fund where we'll raise the next lot of money to basically scale.
Okay, so the rough numbers in my head there is the company was valued at around $2 million at the time you did the crowd fund, based on the 80% that's left.
Yeah, 1.7 million. I mean, how do you value a company? It's just an idea. And this is the thing. This is where, the real story about Happy Cow Milk is that we're just customer driven. Like, the customers or the fans have really just driven this along and enabled us to keep going. And, if you talk to professional investors, they wouldn't have invested in this company. And even today, I'm still talking to them, but it's really hard to get an angel investor across the line at this early stage. And really, if we didn't have this funding, well, I wouldn't be able to do it, because I've already ploughed all my money into it in the first iteration.
So it's the seed money for the idea, that then the next step is find those 1,500 households once the first factory in a box is created and a farmer has it and is able to produce milk within that proximity of a city or town. That's the... Do you know which one in New Zealand that'll be? Like, would it be the first place?
We've got interested farmers all around. We've got our first farmer signed up in the Waikato, but we're based in Christchurch. So we're talking with a farmer in Canterbury at the moment. We'd like to start the first one down here, so we can troubleshoot and fix things down here close to HQ. So launch in Christchurch, test the system, make sure it's working. Basically, we're going to have to go through various iterations of hardware and electronics, I assume, and change some code in the way we do things. And then when it's really bulletproof, that's when we're going to start sending it around the country to farmers to operate on their own. And then once we've got that and we've ironed that out, it would be just start seeding farms around the world.
What have you learned about manufacturing through this, both the good and bad of manufacturing in New Zealand and some of the components and sourcing also from overseas?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like, stainless steel, actually, the thing I thought was the easiest to solve, the most basic, less tech part of the problem, has actually been the most difficult, and that's been our stainless steel tanks. It's obviously we're dealing with 100-litre pasteurizers, and those are it's pretty rare in New Zealand. And while it's a fairly simple process, you get stainless steel and you bend it up, and then you TIG weld it, and then you polish all the welds to a food grade standard. So it's not hard. It's just that it takes a bit of labour. And in New Zealand, I suppose you pay someone $30 an hour to weld up each tank. The cost adds up. And just to give you some examples, the quotes from New Zealand are coming around 3,000 up to 10,000 a tank. And we're getting our one-off tanks made in China at $1,000 New Zealand.
Wow! So it's a two-thirds less, or even less than that, 90% less.
Yeah, and that's including freight. And yeah, so we had, when we raised our money, I was starting talking to China. We're just going to quickly get a few tanks over here and get moving. And then COVID hit, or Chinese New Year, and then COVID, and China was shut. So I thought, well, we can't really rely on China anymore. So we started through the trying to get New Zealand manufacturing done through the early part of last year. And I suppose what happens is, if you're a manufacturer in New Zealand, you've really got your business model set. You know what you make. You either make tanks for Fonterra or Synlait, or something like that. And when someone like me comes along and says, well, we need this tank and it needs to be light, so it needs to be made out of 1.2 mil stainless, they're thinking, well, that's too thin. I'll say, no, we can't do it. Oh, you'll blow holes in it. I won't weld anything less than 1.6, and all these sorts of things. And you have to really, I find the struggle is actually finding people who want to do it, because many people are capable. Everyone's capable of. Obviously, there's people in China doing it. It's just they've got their business. They're already making money doing what they're doing, and it's not in their best interest to fiddle around with some, tiny little tank. So that's probably been the biggest issue for me, is really people just wanting to invest the time and think, how can you do it? So anyway, we've done that, and we haven't quite decided, but I think we're going to go to Callaghan shortly and apply for an R&D grant, because we've got a cunning way of making these tanks.
Well, hopefully this podcast and story will go to the right places, and maybe I can send it to a couple of places and twist an arm or two. And it might just be, at least at your size and scale, it might just be one person that you need at the moment, or do you need a company and a production line?
Yeah, no, just one person. But actually, the real problem is me. The real problem is I have unreasonable expectations, and we've put a price at $1,500 a tank, including everything. That's the electronics and everything on there. So, it's not going to be easy to get there. But when you put a restriction in place, or you put a roadblock like that, it makes you think in different ways. So we've been rummaging around this idea for 12 months trying to fix it, and I think we'll get there. But like I say, it just comes down to a labour. I mean, if you just put 8 hours at $30 an hour, and you spend 2 days on that, well, then you're already above that target. So I don't know. I'm unreasonable, put it that way.
I like unreasonable people because they're sticklers for their vision, and they look at things through a different lens. The two things that came to mind there was the burgeoning aerospace industry in Christchurch. There's going to be some good manufacturing contacts there. There's someone else I just connected for their electronic side. It's a very large New Zealand business that has got scale at taking prototypes to full production, miniaturizing it, and just taking almost all the cost out of it if someone's already got prototypes and plans. and they're always looking for people who have the prototypes and plans, not the ideas, but the prototypes and plans. So maybe I can connect you with them as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What else haven't I asked about here? In your side time, I was looking at you're also a contributing writer for Stuff, and I looked back, and there's a number of articles like a year ago, and then 6 months ago that was your last article. So I'm reading between the lines that for the last 6 months things have got pretty busy with your day job, your passion, which is the Happy Cow Milk.
No. What happened was Stuff fired all their opinion writers. Lockdown happened.
Well, it's time for them to get you back, because I've just been one of the first businesses to advertise on their new platform.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, actually, it was good for me. I think I wrote for 12 months, and writing's actually one column a week is actually quite hard, and I found it really difficult. And it would take me 2 days to write an article at the start, and at the end, I think I've become a better writer. So it was interesting, but it's really funny. Every time you write a column, you just get outraged people from either side. And then you write a column the next week, and then different people are outraged, but there's always someone outraged.
You pick up a good point. Like, writing does make you a better writer, but also I think orders your thoughts so you can articulate the great ideas better. And I always, like with this podcast and with the content we put out for Buy New Zealand Made, I actually get concerned if there's no outrage. If there's a group that doesn't like it, great. It means there's a point that's been made. If there's nothing on either side, it's really a puff piece. It's not actually, it's not deep. It's not what it could have been if you had gone deeper.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it's funny, like I would sit there and think, oh, I'm going to write about this. I know all about it. And then you'd sit down to write it and you're like, oh, actually, and also if you write something wrong, boy, you get told straight away. I think my first column, I had Horticulture New Zealand complained and put out a press release to complain about my facts, but I was very careful after that. All my facts were still right, but and also if you write about Fonterra, the editor gets a call very quickly in the morning.
It's different when you put those words into a newspaper than if you put them into a social media post. The same message has a whole lot more weight. Glenn, what else haven't I asked you about with Happy Cow Milk or your journey so far? Maybe the part we haven't dug into is the part that a lot of business owners actually don't want to share, and you've been quite open in the past about the hard bits. You know, when a business doesn't go the way you intend, and most startups don't, how did you handle that part? How did you get through those dark moments?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It puts pressure on every aspect of your life, and I suppose if you've got weak areas, it's going to bring out those weaknesses. And I suppose everyone knows that family life suffers, and you just work so hard to try and get this thing going. And I mean, it was the end of my my marriage, so that was a 20-year relationship, and I don't think it wasn't the business. I think the business just brought it to a head, basically, and you start having to deal with the issues that maybe you don't deal with. But I've got a friend as well who's a failed startup, was very successful, got lots of money, and ended up still failing. And boy, he's struggled. He's still probably 3 or 4 years out from the failure, and it's really hard. And I think this is it's not spoken about enough, I suppose. When people do fail, because for instance, I mean, you try to manage the risk as best you can, and you only allocate a little bit of money, and then you just need a little bit more money, and of course the bank wants a personal guarantee. So now your house is on the line, and then that brings on stress, and then when things don't go well, basically the way deciding to shut down meant that I had to sell. We sold all our assets and basically came out at zero. And that's I guess that's just the way it goes. And I think if you're not prepared to do that, then I probably think it probably isn't right for you. But yeah, I mean, only do a startup if you can't not do a startup.
It's true that the startup part and you pin so much hopes on it, and you have to be so driven by the vision, and sometimes that cash flow doesn't match how long you need. The vision's still correct, and it's not always in your control. I had my best friend, he was in the hotel and accommodation scene, chief exec of a New Zealand company, which I won't name, and he left that to do his own startup. And this was a riff off something that was already successful in the US, an app-based version of booking, and 2 years later, and family in the business, funding had gone. He had to shut it down, take all the code off online, go back to corporate. And he really still couldn't deal with it, 5-6 years later. And through COVID, even though he'd become very successful in in his work back in a listed company, he's no longer with us. He really it brought him down, and there were other contributing factors, but taking his own life because he saw there was a level that he wanted to get at, and he couldn't get to it. And I think the lack of ability in New Zealand with New Zealand people, businesses, to accept that failure actually gives someone more resilience if they're going to go at it again. Failure isn't failure of the person, it's of the business model at that time. Like Facebook and Instagram and Airbnb, those models aren't necessarily new. There was previous ones. They just happened to be in the right time slot as well. And I think and I hope for your sake that, because you already know, right, that 2 years ago wasn't the right time slot. And now might not be. It might be 6 years from now, but as long as you can take the little steps with this new model, then you get to play the game for the next 6 years to find out.
I can't afford it. I'm already 6 years into it. It needs to happen now. But the thing you say is true. I think it's more a man thing. Actually, men seem to take on their work as their identity. And I'm not saying women don't, because they do as well. But when you look at the figures, men struggle with like long-term unemployment far more difficulty than a lot of women do. And we see it a lot in farmers as well. As a lot of the suicide rate's quite high in farmers, and farmers fail all the time too. And when I suppose you're trying to be successful and you identify yourself as a successful farmer or a startup founder or something, and then it crashes, you're losing your identity as well. And I think my identity is this. And I think also a lot of founders have something to prove. They're either, they've, low self-esteem or something, or they need to prove it to someone or prove it to themselves that they can, be something. And anyway, I'm sure psychologists could have a field day with entrepreneurs.
I think so. My own story, or one of the startups, I started selling MP3 players in 1998, and I'd gone to Germany with a friend of mine that we used to drink. I was 21, and we were in a bar, and he's like, "I'm going to this conference in Germany, CeBIT," and so hopped on a plane, thought I was going to find something I could resell back here, and there was a stand with MP3 players, and I did pretty well off them between 98 and 2001. It was a bit scary when pallets of this technology equipment turned up at my flat on the terrace in Wellington, and the guy from Toll's like, "Okay, where's your loading entrance?" And I said, I don't have a loading entrance. And he said, "Well, I'm not taking them through there." So I've got my flatties out and I'm helping, and we're unloading all these things in the street while he's double parked on the terrace stopping traffic. And then for the next 18 months, in my room and my flatty's room is just all these empty, because they're, rack mount, they're everywhere, they're under the bed, my desk is gone, it's just become my desk. And the thing I worried about was Sony's going to come along and they're going to take this market. And I was scared that I didn't want to order anymore because by 2001, I'm going to be out of the game. And it wasn't Sony, it was Apple in 2002. And it really wasn't Apple. It was really Sonos. And that was 14 years later. And it strikes home to me that none of that was in my control. There was almost none of it I could have really influenced. So to tie my identity or success to any part of it, and so if you don't tie your success if you don't tie your identity to the failure, you also don't get to tie your identity to the success. And I think
I think we often underestimate the amount of luck that also goes into a successful startup. There's often, very successful people who execute perfectly, but a lot of it is timing. You just turn up at the right time. And actually being able to identify timing as I don't think there's anything I don't like to say there's luck, but sometimes there is. And you kind of make your luck, but,
I think if you work hard, and this is something my dad used to say, if you work hard and you're at the right place at the right time, then you'll have more chance of more opportunities for luck to strike.
Yeah, what's the saying? The harder I work, the luckier I get.
Well, there's still there's lots of 2021 to go, and I think you're on the right side of the biggest thing to get right, which is the mind shift of where consumers are at. And you've personally come a long way from 2 years ago of how this is going to happen. Not the why has stayed the same, but the how, there's a clear path there. In my head, I can see now there's 1,500 households in a suburb in Sydney or Brisbane with a nearby farmer that has 50, 100, 200 cows that will start to be the dots on the map for the Happy Cow network.
Yeah, so that's right, but we're, February already. The months tick over really quickly, and it's actually, it's amazing how long things can take to develop, particularly hardware, because you need to make a hardware change. It's hard to diagnose it's a hardware change. It's hard to, you need something new. It's a new PCB board, so that takes 3 weeks basically to design and print and get back to you. And so, time will go.
From the New Zealand-made audience and the manufacturers that listen to this show, what do you need, or what would you like from each of those groups?
Actually, electronics is easy. I say it takes 3 weeks, but it's because our New Zealand guys take time. But they send the file to China. They print the board. It sends it back 3 days later. It's amazing. For us, it's stainless steel. But going back to that, the same principle of the milk processing. What's the most expensive part? It was bottling and handling pasteurized milk. So we think, what's the most expensive part of our tank? And it's the welding. So how do we build a tank without welding? That's really where we're working on now. So and again, going back to old technology, metal spinning. It's where you put a big sheet of metal on a lathe and you basically spin it into a shape. It's how they make lampshades and stuff like that. So we're investigating that.
Okay.
So anyone knows about metal spinning, we're keen to chat.
Metal spinning. I'm going to put that in the show notes. Put a link to this.
Google it. Go to YouTube. It's amazing. YouTube is the biggest form of inspiration for entrepreneurs. You can find all sorts of answers to all sorts of issues on YouTube.
It is how to everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Glenn, it's been a wonderful chat today with you, deep and meaningful as I knew it would be. Thank you for sharing so generously on the KIWI Original, and good luck on this stage of the next stage of your journey.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate you been in touch, and we appreciate your support over the years.
Oh, look, you're welcome, and I know it's just starting, and there's more we can do as New Zealand Made to help you bring happy cows and happy milk to New Zealand and then to the export markets.
Cool. Thanks, mate.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching this episode of a KIWI Original. If you like what you saw, then hit the subscribe button and you'll get other episodes just like this one in your inbox. Make sure you hit the bell too for notifications, and you'll be served up uniquely Kiwi stories like this one contributing to New Zealand's future.